Hello, and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. I would like to thank all of our listeners who allow this program to continue to provide the latest news through our exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and reputable sources from around the world. If you would like to stay up to date with our program, you can view or download all of our broadcasts online at youtube.com/VORradio, or you can join our Facebook page to find information on past and future programs. It is October 12th, 2014. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. Our top story tonight comes after the Myanmar government is offering citizenship to Rohingya in exchange for registering themselves as Bengali immigrants. Authorities have sealed off villages in Myanmar's only Muslim-majority region and in some cases beaten and arrested people who refuse to register with immigration officials, residents and activists say, in what might be the most aggressive effort yet to force Rohingya to indicate they are illegal migrants from neighboring Bangladesh. Immigration officials, border guards, and members of the Illegal Alien Task Force in the northern tip of Rakhine State said they were simply updating family lists as they have in the past. But this year, in addition to questions about marriages, deaths, and births, people were classified by ethnicity. "We are trapped," Kin Maung Win said last week. He said authorities started setting up police checkpoints outside his village in mid-September, preventing people from leaving even to shop for food in local markets, work in surrounding paddies, or take children to school. "If we don't have letters and paperwork showing we took part, that we are Bengali, we can't leave," he said. Chris Lua of the Arakan Project, which has been advocating on behalf of the Rohingya for more than a decade, said residents reported incidents of violence and abuse in at least 30 village tracts from June to late September. While the weeks-long blockades have since been lifted, arrests continue with dozens of Rohingya men being rounded up for alleged ties to Islamic militants in the last week. Almost all Rohingya were excluded from a UN-funded nationwide census earlier this year, the first in 3 decades, because they did not want to register as Bengalis. And Thein Sein is considering a Rakhine State action plan, which would include the construction of temporary camps in required numbers for those who refuse to be registered and those without adequate documents. Rights groups warn that the provisions could force thousands of Rohingya from their villages into camps where they would be detained indefinitely. Most Rohingya have lived under apartheid-like conditions in northern Rakhine for decades, with limited access to adequate health care, education, and jobs, as well as restrictions on travel and the right to practice their faith. Tensions surrounding the family registration campaign in northern Rakhine rose steadily after it began 4 months ago, with most of the resistance felt in Maungda Township. Many villages were placed under lockdown with police checkpoints set up to make sure only those who have cooperated could leave, more than a dozen residents confirmed in telephone interviews with the Associated Press. In other villages, the names of influential residents were posted on community boards with verbal warnings that they face up to 2 years in jail if they fail to convince others to take part in the registration process, Lua said. Other Rohingya say officials forced them to sign the papers at gunpoint or threatened that they would end up in camps like those outside Sitwe if they didn't comply, she said. In some cases, residents say authorities have shown up after midnight and broken down doors to catch residents by surprise and pressure them to hand over family lists. Villagers also have been kicked and beaten with clubs and arrested for refusing to take part, according to Lua and residents interviewed by the AP. Lua said that when authorities ended blockades, they also stopped the registration campaign. Rohingya said they didn't want to register family members because they worry the information might be used to deny them citizenship. As international pressure mounts to end abuses against Rohingya, the government has agreed to provide citizenship to anyone who qualifies. But many Rohingya say they cannot meet the requirements, which include submitting documents proving that their families have been in Myanmar for at least 3 generations. And under the plan Thein Sein is considering, even that would not be enough for people who insist on calling themselves Rohingya rather than Bengali. Wen Myang, a spokesperson from Rakhine State government, said authorities' efforts to update family lists had an added sense of urgency because of concerns that Islamic extremists could try to slip across the border from neighboring Bangladesh. "We have to know who's who," Myang said. "We want to know who are strangers and who are not." Though he did not comment on the allegations of abuses, as to why the government insists on calling the villagers Bengali, Myang said, "Because they are Bengali. What else should we call them?" The director of the immigration office in one town agreed, "We are only checking the villagers' family household lists and their identification cards. That's all," he said. "There are no Rohingya in this country, and the government has said that as well. We are just doing what we have to do. You are listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Thanks again for tuning in to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America, bringing you English language news concerning the Rohingya and other persecuted minorities in Myanmar. I am your host, Zach Taylor. Amnesty International says the release of some 3,000 prisoners by Myanmar is essentially an empty political gesture as scores of peaceful activists are believed to remain behind bars. The Myanmar authorities announced October 7th that the prisoners would be released in an amnesty, but none of the country's prisoners of conscience, activists detained solely for peacefully expressing their views, will be included in the release, notes the human rights organization. This is nothing but an empty gesture on the authorities' part, said Richard Burnett, Amnesty International's Asia-Pacific director, in a press release. The timing so close to the ASEAN summit in Myanmar in early November smacks of political opportunism. He said that if the authorities were genuine about improving respect for human rights, they would follow through on the long-standing promise to clear the country's jail of the dozens of peaceful activists. We are still receiving reports of human rights defenders, land rights activists, journalists, political activists, and others being imprisoned for nothing more than expressing their opinion, Mr. Bennett said. As long as these detentions continue, amnesties like this one do nothing to improve Myanmar's rights situation. A large group of trafficked boat people is being held by local authorities north of Phuket to protect them from local police and ensure their rights are upheld. According to one of the boat people who spoke in English by telephone to Phuket One News, a group of 53 had been among 310 men, women, and children kidnapped by Thai brokers. At least 100 more Rohingya and Bangladeshis are still hidden on an island off the holiday coast of Thailand's Andaman region north of Phuket, he said. Local officials have taken the apprehended boat people into custody and called in human rights lawyers because of the concerns that the police will not recognize the boat peoples as asylum seekers and treat them instead as illegal immigrants. The case is likely to bring to the attention of Thailand's government the continuing human trafficking off Thailand's coast as increasing numbers of Rohingya flee persecution in Burma. The men were waiting in bushes alongside the main road through the large coastal township of Takwapa. 2 men alleged to be traffickers fled when authorities swooped in. Others from the same trafficking boat had already been trucked south towards the border with Malaysia, the asylum seeker aged 22 told Phuket One. I fled from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and there were 310 people on the boat, he said. We quickly realized we had been kidnapped and we were going to be sold on. I was beaten on the boat and in the camp as well. Many uninhabited islands dot the coast north of Phuket, allowing human trafficking to flourish over the past few years as increasing numbers of Rohingya have fled. Locals and outlaw men in uniform are believed to have turned to trading in people as a highly profitable source of income. The asylum seeker told Phuket One he had become desperate after a lifetime as an unwanted refugee in a Rohingya camp in Bangladesh. He left behind a 1-year-old child, his wife, and his mother. In a post on the man's Facebook page, he wrote, "Where do I belong? Where is my house? Where can I go? I don't want to be a refugee anymore. I just want to live in peace." In other news, dozens of Rohingya have been arrested and tortured because of alleged ties to a militant Islamic organization, according to a rights group. The Arakan Project, a Thailand-based group that documents abuses against the Rohingya, says one man has been tortured to death in Myanmar's far northwest, near the border with Bangladesh. Authorities have rounded up at least 58 men in the last 2 weeks from several villages in the north of Rakhine State, according to figures compiled by the Arakan Project and seen by the Andalu Agency. The wife of the dead man told the group she was forced to sign a statement that her husband had died of natural causes. Last month, an al-Qaeda leader announced plans to expand his terror network to include Myanmar. The recently arrested Rohingya men were accused of having ties to a group called the Rohingya Solidarity Organization, or RSO. Chris Lua, the Arakan Project's founder, told the AA Friday the arrests were arbitrary and clearly a reaction to the al-Qaeda announcement earlier in September. She added that the men were picked up at checkpoints or from their villages by members of the Border Guard Police, an organization that the Rohingya regularly accuse of human rights abuses. Earlier this year, Kim Myong-mint, head of the foreign relations for the pro-Rohingya National Democratic Party for Development, claimed the RSO hadn't existed for 20 years. He said stories about RSO movements in the region had led to conspiracy theories and questioned whether the existence of the group was a government smokescreen. I'd like to thank you again for tuning in today to Voice of Rohingya Radio. As always, you can view and download our broadcasts at youtube.com/VORradio, and you can join our Facebook page for more information on the program. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.